Don Bies is our latest Star Wars veteran guest. When he was with Industrial Light and Magic, he worked as, this is a short list, puppet engineer on Steven Spielberg's Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, creature and model maker in the special editions of both The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, model maker and R2-D2 operator on Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. Stop me if you've heard all these. Model maker on AI, Pearl Harbor, Pirates of the Caribbean's Dead Man Chest, and Curse of the Black Pearl. And his most novel resume entry includes more R2-D2 operation in Revenge of the Sith and in the miniseries The Science of Star Wars and at live events. Nowadays, he and his wife Anna, who is also an ILM model maker, formed Fair Street Productions, and they design and create large-scale traveling exhibits. They have some documentary projects in development too. Please welcome Don Bies.
Thank you. You know that this isn't the football game here, right? You guys are.
We asked him to bring some items for some show and tell, and we're going to start out with a short 4-minute film, and then we'll swing into conversation.
Yeah, and just so you know, I didn't work on all these films, but this is something I edited for another purpose, and I turned it into is kind of the ILM model shop, like legacy reel, because the ILM model shop no longer exists. So, how many films can you name?
That was a good way to start.
It always gets the blood flowing.
Yeah, I want to start at the beginning. I was listening to an interview of yours where you talked about, growing up in Chicago and, eventually making your way into this world. And I kind of wondered what kind of kid grows up to be able to do stuff like this. So were you a geek? Were you a hippie? Were you an athlete? What were you?
A little bit of everything. Not the hippie part, but I was a little bit of everything else. I was fascinated with film since I was very young. And one of the things that inspired me when I was about 6 years old, and an older cousin tried to scare me by showing me the movie Frankenstein, the 1931 Boris Karloff Frankenstein, and instead of being scared by it, I was impressed with it, and I went on this search, and obviously this is long before the internet and before how-to books really in that realm. Showed how to do the makeup, and I was just, how did they get his face to look like that? And that's kind of what sent me on that path. And then right after that, I discovered films like King Kong and Planet of the Apes, and then Star Wars came out. And I was 16 when Star Wars came out, and it had everything in a movie that I always wanted to see. So I just became fascinated with it, and figured, well, that's it. I'm going to make movies the rest of my life. And
You were impressed with the sound in Star Wars, which I don't think a lot of people at 16 would have really taken note of.
yeah, the sound and the music. Yeah, that's what I think. That's when it sent over the edge for me when I'm watching the movie, and well, of course the opening scene with the Star Destroyer and everything like that. And you know that in the exhibition is the actual Star Destroyer, the model that came over, that little 3-foot model, is that one that they used. And so that that was like we just sat there with our mouths wide open, but it was in the desert actually. When See-Threepio is walking and you hear the servos moving, I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. No one thought of doing that before, or at least that I could remember. So
You were also a fan of magic.
I was, yes. How'd you know that?
Did my work.
I was. Actually, I was a fan of two things besides movies when I was growing up: was magic, illusions, and that sort of thing, and the space program. And so I thought, well, maybe I could be a magician. And then I thought, well, maybe I could be an astronaut. And then I found out all that school you had to go through to be an astronaut. And it's like, I don't think I could do that. So I kind of combined them later and made space movies. So
That was weird because I read that in 1985 you came out to Northern California to get into the film business. But the work that you did, somebody looked at you and said, this is a guy who could do mechanical engineering sort of things, and someone else looked at you and said, this is a great guy to go through our archives and catalog them. I'm just wondering what skill set translated to both of those job descriptions.
Well, I faked it a lot. When I got hired for Chris Walas on The Fly, which is a couple pictures here, I got to work on that guy, among other things. But he asked if I thought I was going to be a makeup artist. I thought I was going to sculpt and do appliances and make people into monsters and stuff like that. And they had that job all sewn up already. So they said and I had built. I've got a picture of it here somewhere. I built my own R2-D2 after seeing Star Wars, and so he saw a picture of that in my portfolio and my resume, and he said, "Well, you can do mechanical stuff too." Then I said, yeah, sure, yeah. And he says, yeah, you knew how to work a mill and a lathe. And yeah. And I had to go out and look up what a mill was. I didn't know what a mill was. I knew how to work a drill press, but I didn't know how to work what a mill was. So I said, yes, yeah, sure, okay. And so they hired me on that basis alone. And I got hired at the archives partially, well, because I had built my own R2-D2, and I had those skills to do that enough that they were looking, in 1987, they were looking for someone to operate R2 for personal appearances and a series of commercials that they were doing and that sort of thing with Japan. And so I got hired to do that, and then they were impressed with my Star Wars knowledge, and the company was much smaller at that time. And they needed somebody to clean out the archives, basically, is what it was. They needed some trash thrown away. And then I said, oh, by the way, do you know you got this and found this and that and the other thing? And so then I started organizing the archives. And then about 2 years later, I became officially the archivist. So.
Well, you retrieved and it was an important mask or an important face piece that was already slated to be thrown out, and you found it in the trash and saved that.
Yeah, the Anakin's reveal when they pull Darth Vader's mask off at the end of Return of the Jedi. The original one, because there's two now. I got to make the one that's in the exhibition. I got to make that for Revenge of the Sith. But the original, and it was one of my favorite pieces, and it was in a crate, and it was in a flannel bag, and there was a bunch of newspapers, garbage on top of it, and we were throwing the crate out, and luckily I just happened to dive into the crate. It was a big crate. I got into it. I figured I better look inside in case there's something else, and I found it. And so we almost got tossed by mistake. Yeah.
When you talk about archives in the film world, and I mean going back to the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, there are all these things that we wish we still had. There's the Magnificent Ambersons, is there a whole version of that? Is there anything like that, kind of a holy grail from the Star Wars or the ILM world where, gee, you guys wish you had hung on to that and you hope you still find it?
I think a few years after they threw a lot of stuff out, they wish we should have kept it. The thing was, at the time when I started in around there in 1987, it was 4 years after Return of the Jedi, so there was kind of a general feeling we're done with Star Wars for now. We don't want to, not that they wanted to get rid of it, but that it was, we're moving on. We're doing other things now. And so what are we going to do with all this stuff? And it wasn't until 91, I think it was, when they built the proper archives at the ranch. So there was a lot of stuff, particularly from the first film, that never, we don't know what happened to. Obi-Wan's lightsaber, for instance, the original lightsaber that Alec Guinness had, that disappeared.
Oh, wow.
Now, but interestingly, a lot of things start popping up every once in a while now on auction and everything, because the people like maybe a prop master or somebody that might have had something, took it home because it was cool looking or whatever, has passed away, and their family finds these treasures in their garage or something and start selling them. So different things like that have popped up. Just recently, a plaster casting of R2-D2's head, that was the original tooling was taking off of for his head for the very first Star Wars, was sold on eBay, sold on Bonhams actually.
Oh, wow. R2-D2 is a really neat symbol of how far the art of making these things has come, and how much of that art and creation is passed into the hands of, regular people. I mean, there are people out there who make R2-D2s now. In fact, our first question from the audience.
We have some R2 builders in the audience.
Raise your hand if you're an R2 builder. All right, nice to have you here. We had a first question from the audience. I read online a fan group will be providing R2s for episode 7.
That's right.
So it's like open source R2s now?
Pretty much, yeah. I think it's my fault that happened too, because I provided the fans with some blueprints a number of years ago. And so now they can build their own, so that now they've got the job. So good luck to them.
I know that the ILM and a lot of that work is in your past, but do you have any involvement with the trilogy, even casually? Do people go back to you and say, hey, I'm working on this now. What's your advice on blah, blah, blah? Will you have any involvement?
Certainly not yet in the new films. I've reached out and they said thanks, but no thanks. They've got it covered, so, all the power to them. We'll hope they don't have to run into the same problems I ran into. No, I mean, through the archives and through the exhibitions like this, I get requests sometimes, but not much, not lately. It was up until before the Disney bought Lucasfilm. I was somewhat involved, but not as much anymore. So.
Well, let's talk about some of the technical innovations over the time span that you've been working. I mean, just looking at the fly here, and you worked on this guy.
Yeah.
How was he done at the time, and how would it be done differently now?
It'll be done digitally now.
Completely digitally
Yeah,
now?
I bet. I mean, that's the sad thing about it. I mean, I understand the digital tools are very powerful, and you can do so many things now with them. But sadly, some of this stuff is lost. And I think some of the best work that's been done with some recent studios and stuff like Legacy Effects, which is Stan Winston's company, or for instance for Jurassic Park, where they combine animatronic full-size dinosaurs with digital dinosaurs. I think that's the best approach, a hybrid approach like that. But at the time, this was actually very interesting. I got to meet doing this thing. John Berg, who is for Star Wars fans, he and Phil Tippett animated the chess set in the original Star Wars, and he was also one of the band members. He's the crew that did some of the creatures for the cantina, and he went over and he eventually did the walkers for Empire Strikes Back. He was a stop motion animator. So at Chris Walas's company, he was like the lead mechanical guy. So he came up with the concept of how this would work, and it was basically he was out the butt end of this guy. We called him the space bug because he looked. I don't know why, but he looked like a space bug, I guess. And out of the back end of this guy is a post that you wouldn't be able to see it because it's obscured by the set piece right there. And on the other end of the post is John attached to to the rig, and it was on a pivot. It was on a fulcrum, and so he could walk. He could move the whole body around like that. And I think there were puppeteers that moved the legs, and then the eyes might have been radio controlled, I can't remember. And then the arms were cable operated. So there was like probably half a dozen people working to move this guy around.
So there's nothing like that now.
Well, not as much. I mean, there are companies down in Los Angeles that still do it. Like I said, Legacy Effects, Amalgamated Dynamics, I think, is another one. Yeah, a lot of it's been replaced by digital, as have models. A lot of model stuff has done that way too.
What would go into the choice of still doing it the old way? Why would someone opt for that if they have the option to just do everything digitally?
Well, when we did it on Star Wars, it was a matter of economics, typically. It's kind of hard to say. I've been trying to crack that myself because I think it actually has to do with the fact that some visual effects supervisors might not just be aware of what they can do. So they just figure, there's the old saying with the only tool in your toolbox is a hammer. Every solution looks like a nail. And I think that's how they approach it. So there's they don't realize that there's things that you could do that way. I think that's part of it. I think another part of it is just, like I said, again, economics. They can change things up to the last minute easier than if we made it and had to blow it up or something. They could move the cameras around in the 3D environment. So it certainly allows for a certain flexibility that you wouldn't have practically. I know another thing that happened when we were working on Pirates of the Caribbean, John Knoll, who's an effects supervisor, came up. Decided he actually analyzed all the rendering time it would take to do all the sails and all the rigging and everything like that, in addition to all the other effects that they had to do for the movie, and they just didn't have the render capability. So then it became it's like, well, let's just make a model and we don't have to worry about rendering it. So it was a digital economic solution for that. So, and we got to build some great pirate ships too. So.
Now, as a model maker, and you can give us both the old story and the current story on this. Talk about the stages that go from somebody's inception, somebody's idea saying, we want this space bug look, to the point where it actually gets on the film. How many fingers are in that pie? How many stages are there?
It depends on how many people are involved. It's interesting. Working on like the Star Wars films, for instance, it was amazing how few fingers could be in the pie. A lot of times it was great working on those in that a lot of times you could just go directly to George and say, this is what we're thinking, and he goes, oh, great, or whatever, change this. Whereas other films, there would be more layers. So, but like at ILM, like with a lot of the models, a lot of times it was as simple as like, we've got this sketch and, build it. And sometimes you'd only have a sketch from a certain angle, so you'd have to interpolate what's on the other side and that sort of thing. So the way that it worked when we were doing, again, like the prequels, there was a model supervisor, overall model supervisor, who would budget and determine who would be assigned to lead that team. And then I was one of the lead supervisors. And there was, I think, 4 of us. And then they would hand it to us. By that point, it had already been designed by an art department, which who knows how many people that touched. And then we would get it, and it's like, okay, it's got to do this, it's got to do that, and it's going to be this big or whatever. And sometimes we would have an input on how big it would get to be. And then then it's like, how are you going to build it? And you got this much time to do it in, and this is how many people you got to work with it. So we were real fortunate that all the model makers that we worked with at ILM, some of us had been working together 10, 15 years. So when you work with that kind of crew where everyone knows how they think, each other think, it really helps a lot. You don't have to worry about what what that person's strength and weakness is, and how far you can push them or not. So then it would just be a matter of whacking it out and getting it on, and then move on to the next one. So all the films, the Star Wars films, again in particular, I think I worked on each of those for a year and a half, and I probably supervised anywhere from 6 to 12 on each film. So, that number determined by how complex and how big it was. So.
Now, when we were talking about the new trilogy a few minutes ago, you said, well, I hope you don't have the problems I had. So some dirt from the set, please. What kind of problems did you have?
Well, I was specifically referring to R2. It's funny because R2 always, certainly in George Lucas's mind, had he didn't work. In George's mind, the thing never worked, and that's not completely true. He did work some of the time. And on the original film, it was more complex. The radio control was in its infancy, particularly on the first film. And so there was a lot of like just pulling on a cable and everything like that. By the time Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, particularly Return of the Jedi came along, it was working pretty fluidly. It still couldn't do so many things, and I think that was one of the frustrations for George, is he wanted to talk to R2 like an actor and say, just, go up those stairs and around the corner or whatever, and R2 doesn't do stairs well. He goes down them really well once, maybe, but... So there's those kinds of restrictions. So Episode 1 came along, and they just packed up all the R2s they had in the archives at that time, shipped them to London, and sadly they did not have any history with it, and they ran into a whole series of issues where, again, R2 doesn't work on sand, and R2 needs so wide to go through doors, and no one thought of like measuring the robot before they built the door and stuff like that. Or we have to have line of sight to see him to operate it, and we can't get in the set to see it. So about a month into filming, we got a call. There were 3 operators at ILM. That I was one of the main ones, and a guy named Nelson Hall is a good friend, and another guy you guys might have heard of, Granny Mahara from Mythbusters. He was the 3rd R2 operator. And Grant also, actually I got a picture of Grant here. Grant also played See-Threepio sometimes. Let me see if I can find that picture. So we got this call saying, R2 is not working. What can you do? And there's Grant. That was for a Walmart commercial we shot in Phoenix, Arizona. So we went through all our solutions and everything, and finally it came down to the producer said, well, why don't you guys build an R2 in California, and these guys will keep working on it, and when you guys get done, come on out to England and use it and shoot it. So that's what I did, and we put together a team of about 10 people, and in 2 weeks we called it the Uber R2, because we had these really big radio control motors in it, actually wheelchair motors. The thing could push like 300 pounds. And it's like, we're going to kill people before we not get it stuck in the sand. And we almost did. I think I ran my son over once with it. So as a matter of fact, I think that might be the R2 we built. And so it worked fine. It was fine. So Episode 2, I got promoted then to R2 supervisor because I licked that problem. And by Episode 2 and 3, we also knew how George worked and knew the restrictions. So I would encourage the assistant director to include me in on any discussions we have about the next scene we're going to shoot, so everyone would they'd say they'd block out the shot, and then they'd all turn to me as like, can R2 do that? And then I'd say, yeah, we can do that. Or no, we can't.
He's like a little prima donna. He's a little
He is.
diva actor.
He's very much so. Yeah. Did you ever see Beneath the Dome? I mean, you get a sense to what he's like. He's a difficult guy to work with. But
so how many R2s? I'm not the unofficial, not the ones that people make on the side, but actual R2s on the screen. How many R2s have been on the screen?
By the time we did Episode 2, I think there were 16 R2s. We were still using bodies that were made for the original Star Wars for the prequels. So there was only, I think in England, we made the one. We actually only made a new body. The head was a R2 that we had laying around, a head that was still laying around. And that's the thing. There was a mismatch. There was like 16 bodies and only 9 heads or something like that. On what happened to them all? And I think the English crew made 3 or 4 new R2s for the prequels. So all those R2s, the majority of R2s were all original films vintage. And so we didn't do anything new to the bodies other than paint them or make them fresher looking. But we did fix the electronics, and that was what Grant was actually crucial to, because Grant's an electrical engineer. So.
One of our audience members wants to go back to your beginnings in the movies, and so I think we've established that you were 24 when you came out here. 23,
yes,
24
24,
years old. And how would you start a career like yours nowadays? You were able to kind of BS your way in. Oh yeah, I can do that, I can do that. I mean, how realistic is it to try to do that now? And do you have to live in Hollywood to do that now?
Well, there's a whole nother subject for like Hollywood and all the work that's leaving California in particular. But no, well, see now that there's not these kind of work, that kind of work anymore. I mean, if you know, there's not as much of it, I should say. It's more digital effects and everything like that. And they're moving wherever the incentives are these days, you know, the tax incentives. So that's why all the films are being shot in England right now, because they're giving them rebates of money. So if you're willing to travel and want to have a nomadic life, yeah, then that's the kind of business you would get into. I mean, there's certainly other aspects, other types of film jobs to get into, like makeup or, you know, regular makeup and that sort of thing. And yes, those kinds of work, it probably would make sense to be in Hollywood. But this kind of work, sadly, it's just not as much of it anymore.
Makeup's kind of a neat element of film because there's a certain long history with that still applies. The digital stuff changes and the technical stuff changes, but you were a fan of makeups from Frankenstein on.
Right.
And you can still see, I mean, there's the show Face Off where you have people competing making makeup. So there's at least some part of the old tradition that still carries through. Yeah,
and I mean, it certainly does. You know, there was that almost like a golden age of makeup effects in the 80s, you know, with American Werewolf in London and The Howling, and, you know, there was a lot of horror films, too, that was going on. That seemed to be where it drove it. I was always also a fan of the character-type makeups with old-age makeup. But that actually went through its own renaissance, too, of even now, the technologies and stuff, there's new technologies back, you know, in the old, like the Frankenstein days. Jack Pierce, who was the makeup artist that did the Frankenstein's monster, he wrapped collodion, which is kind of like a, I don't know even how to describe what collodion is, but it's like a plasticizer in cotton, so it's highly flammable. And he would just dip it every day. He'd have to resculpt that onto Karloff's head. So every time it was, you know, it's always different. It was never the same. It was not molded. And it wasn't until maybe about 6, 7 years later that they started molding it, and they brought in foam latex, which was like a furniture foam, you know, which is beds were being made out of at that time. And so that the technology kept growing, and now they're into, you know, silicones and gelatin and stuff like that for age makeups and any kind of character makeup. So that, yeah, that stuff's just changed a lot too. I'm involved with a project right now where we're making an alien, and we're using silicone for the skin, and I've never even used silicone before, so I'm relying on the guy that's helping us that he knows what he's doing.
So if your job is to make an alien now, it'd be very different than it would be in 1950 to make an alien, because now there have been so many. How do you imagine something new to bring to the table?
Actually, in regards to the project we're doing now, we're actually recreating something that are somebody already made. But that's a good question. I mean, it is, you know, it's always hard. Everything you make, it's always like, oh, that kind of looks like such and such or whatever. You know, it's like it's reminiscent of so and so. So that is always a challenge, and I think that's even like for instance, the new Star Wars films. I think they're going to be up against that too, because, you know, everything's comparing it to the other films, the original films, or that it's not going to have the same feel. I think that was one of the complaints I remember hearing about Episode 1 and 2, and, you know, that the ships didn't feel like they might have been from the same universe and that sort of thing. So, but they were actively trying not to do that at the time. But it is a challenge to come up with something new.
Mm-hmm.
So.
When you get an assignment to do something like, well, we were talking earlier before we started chatting in front of everyone here, we were talking about the use of laser cutting these days.
Mm-hmm.
And to talk about the different technologies that are available and how you make your choice what's best.
Yeah, let me pull up some photos.
Okay.
Yeah, well, one of the things I was actually fortunate to get involved with at ILM at the model shop was laser cutting and 3D modeling. And so we did this real hybrid approach of taking one of the more common things now to do is to have pre-visualization done before the film's actually shot. A movie like Gravity, the whole entire film was pre-visualized before they actually shot a frame of film.
That means storyboards, or?
Yeah, but it was actually animated, it was like a low resolution, like a video game animation almost. And then they used that as a real blueprint when they shot the film. And to that extent, even like Iron Man or any of those movies now still employ that. And George actually did on the very first Star Wars, he did his own pre-visualization for the dogfight sequence, where he took old 16mm footage of dogfights from other movies and cut it together to get the feel of like what the rhythm and everything of that sequence. And so then when they moved on to Empire Strikes Back, they filmed like a stop motion, like a cartoon of the storyboards. And then by the time I think they went to Return of the Jedi, they were using little models and video cameras and shooting the sequences, and then eventually evolved into using a computer for the same thing. So there's these low-res video game type movies of the sequence. And actually, by the time Revenge of the Sith came along, I mean, the stuff was looking good. It's like, why don't we just use this because it looks pretty good. But so we would take that data sometimes for a scene. And it was great because so many times everyone's debating on how much of the model we'd have to build, or how what are we going to see? It's like, well, we've got it right here, and we've got the 3D data that will tell us we only need this much. You put an 18mm lens on it, we're only going to see this much, and that's all we had to build. And so it was that specific sometimes. So we would take that 3D geometry out, and in the case of this is Pirates of the Caribbean. I don't have a sequence of the entire thing all the way through, but this is the Dauntless, which is the bad guy's ship. It's actually the HMS Constitution. I can't remember what the actual. It's based on they're all based on real battleships, and they had a 3D model of it that they were using for the pre-visualization, plus for set pieces that they were building. And I was able to take it and cut it up into pieces, and we were making the hull stations and everything like that. And this is kind of the process. In the background, you see, I think that's the Black Pearl being under construction, and so the Dauntless in the foreground. And so we did this. We cut it up into with a laser cutter, and then we put these stringers along the way, and then and that would actually start determining the hull shape. We built these like real boats. This is actually another boat. This is from Peter Pan, but then we took Italian poplar and stripped it down like that and put these strips over it, and then crisscrossed it with another pattern, and then planked it, and that's how we determined the length, the shape of the ship. And then there was a lot of sanding involved, and occasionally a little bit of Bondo to fill up the problems where we had. Yeah, so, and then we got to do the fun stuff of like doing the deck paneling and all the rails and the fun stuff like those little finials and stuff that you see here. Those are actually off-the-shelf items that we were able to find that were the right size. And so we had the actual blueprints, and we were
I love
able
the hammer for scale.
Yeah.
That's really cool in there.
This one actually was the smallest scale, and in the film, in Pirates, the very first Pirates of the Caribbean, there's an opening shot of it comes out of the fog, and she's the young Keira Knightley standing on the deck singing. It's actually the model that you see come out of the fog. They were able to get that close to it. There's a fun story about the Pirates of the Caribbean. So all the ships were based on real boats, real ships, and that's the Black Pearl under construction. I was saying about scale, sorry. This was 12th scale, and then Black Pearl was 6th scale, so 1 foot equals 6 inches. This is actually yet another ship. This is the Interceptor, I think. And this is another ship. This is from Peter Pan. There's Kim Smith, who's going to be talking here next month. And that's it being filmed. But all the ships for Pirates of the Caribbean were based on real boats. And when they went to do, anytime they built the ships, they actually built them full size to a point. They only built the masts so high, they didn't put the full masts on them. Whenever you see it in the film, those are our miniature masts with sails composited on top of their boat that was just built on top of a barge. So that they could actually just troll through the water. But they were building, every time they had them run it by a naval architect, the blueprints. And they had the one for Davy Jones' ship, which is, I can't remember Davy Jones' name was, but when they ran by the naval architect, he said that, no, he rejected them because he said this ship will sink. And they said, well, no, it's based on a real ship. And he says, well, I'm telling you right now, the ship will sink. What's it based on? And he said, they said it's the Vasa. It's from Stockholm. And for those that you don't know, 300 years ago, the Vasa was the pride of the Swedish Navy. They built the ship, and through bureaucracy and everything like that, they took it out into the harbor, and within 30 minutes, it keeled over and sunk to the bottom of the bay. So the naval architect was right. And so,
how can you study the Vasa enough to make a scale replica of it without hearing about the sinking
the
part?
story, yeah, that's what I was wondering.
So one of the things that we see evolving, especially in Star Wars, more so than anywhere else, is the chance to go back, revisit the film, redo some of the special effects, redo some of the work. I wonder what it feels like to work so hard on the special effects, the models, the miniatures, whatever, only to have your work kind of negated later on. Have you ever talked to any of the folks who worked on the originals who got, is there some sense of ownership that gets compromised there?
Maybe among some people. You know, a lot of the work we did that I was involved in, you know, we blew up the thing after we built it. And that was kind of cathartic, you know, because you were so tired of the darn thing after a while. And it's like, can I press the button, you know, to blow it up? Yeah, I don't know. You know, the people like Lauren Peterson and Steve Gawley that worked on the originals, I don't know if they really felt that badly about it. You know, the work was there, and they got the, you know, they got the acknowledgement at the time. So, yeah, I don't think they. I would certainly wouldn't bother me a whole lot. You know, I never was that tied to anything I did that well. So.
Well, the other thing that's real about the Star Wars universe is the fandom. The people who are into Star Wars are really into Star Wars. And the mistakes, any mistakes you might make, I'm thinking particularly, you mentioned Gravity. And the movie Gravity came out, and a couple weeks later somebody said, hey, you know, Sandra Bullock's pants wouldn't be that tight because she has to accommodate diapers, so that's a mistake. And I thought that kind of mistake made in Star Wars would get pointed out when the previews came out. I mean, you know, everything is under such scrutiny. Is that something that you're aware of in the act of making things? How many eyeballs are going to be looking at this so critically?
Yes, actually. Funny you mention that. I've got a photo of something that was a mistake that we were always trying to wonder how they're going to explain this one away. This ship. Did you notice how R2 hangs out the bottom of it? That was the full-size ship that they built for Episode 3. And there's things like that the heads of, you know, R2 fitting into the Naboo fighter. It's like, where's his body go? You know, for instance, this one, it's like we thought they cut to a scene of his feet just dangling under the ship or something. And we'd point it out occasionally, politely. There was one story that, again, mine obviously tend to deal with the robots, but we were doing Episode 2, and I had just gotten to Sydney. And George had just arrived in Sydney to begin filming. We were going to start filming the next week. I'd been there already a week. And he wanted to see, they wanted us to demonstrate how well R2 could plug his computer arm socket into the ship's computer or something like that. And so we got onto the set, the Queen ship set, and we demonstrated. He thought it was great and everything like that. And then he goes, oh, you know what? We've got... Obi-Wan's got an R2, a droid in his ship, and I had read the script, so I said, "Oh yeah, it's R4," and he said, "Yeah." He said, "Do you have a head we can use for that?" I said, "Oh sure." I said, "Now the R4, there's a whole canon for those that might not know. There's a whole canon of R2-shaped heads. R2 is the silver and, you know, this style. R3 is looks just like that, but it's a clear dome where you can see the mechanism. R4, it looks kind of like a lampshade. And R5 is, it's the guy the red one that blows up in A New Hope, the bad motivator. And so I pointed out to George, I said, oh, R4 is, you know, the lampshade head. He goes, oh no, I don't want that one. And I said, oh, okay. I said, well, you know what would be kind of cool is the R3 style head, because that robot was called R4P17. I said, the clear head is kind of cool. You know, you get to see. He says, nah. He says, can't you just take an R2 head and paint it red? And I said, yeah, sure. You can do whatever you want. And so he completely just bypassed whatever canon there was. And we painted an R2 head red. So yeah, there's lots of mistakes that you notice them, and it's like, well, what are we going to do? So.
Do you have any real zingers that were committed on your watch that you wish you could go back and redo?
Let me think about that. I'm trying to think.
Yes, and I have a picture of one.
Yeah. No, I mean, we put some stuff. We put joke stuff in there. There's when one of the pods pulls up in the pit stop in the episode 1, and a droid gets sucked through the engine. That was all a model we created, not the droid. But the pit had all this like junk along the way. It was supposed to, so we used bits of model pit cars and that sort of thing. And we put a glue bottle. It's right there. If you know where to look for it, it's right there. And we painted it to look like just junk. But it's very clearly a glue bottle once you identify it. If you look I noticed in the exhibition here, you can't really see it very well. But in the Rebel Blockade Runner, probably everyone knows this, but there's a centerfold in the cockpit. And, the Millennium Falcon, go look at the Millennium Falcon, you'll see a lot of signatures of the artists that worked on it. So there's like purposeful mistakes we put in there. So.
Well, the side of your career we haven't talked about yet is the side that actually had on the other side of the camera, being an actor. So was that to fulfill, a long-delayed wish, or because you were the guy who was nearest, or what?
Not at all. I happen to be able to fit in the costume. I have some pictures, as a matter of fact. Where is it? Actually, I was talking about my R2 earlier. That was the start of my R2. And that's it a little further along. And that was a R2 2.0. That was a little better. But anyway, this was a Japanese commercial we did where George was actually in it. And that's myself and Nelson Hall on the right as the stormtroopers. And that was, again, I was taking care of the costumes and everything as the archivist. And they said, "You know anybody that can fit these things?" I said, "Well, yes. As a matter of fact, I can wear them." They said, "Okay, you're hired." So that's really how it started. And then, there's the Wampa. That costume's in there. I'm not in the Wampa suit. That's Howie Weed, who's was another model maker at ILM at the time. And so that was for the special edition. And then this was the Return of the Jedi special edition, the musical number that they added, and I'm holding the large pipe or whatever that is. And then actually in the white shirt, it's my wife right there. You can see her. She's embarrassed because she's sitting in the audience there. She's not gonna. There she is grooving, as I am too. And actually the four people on the left, it's Blake Tucker, who was a stand-in for Nelson Hall, who actually played the part, and myself. This is a rehearsal day that we did. Anna's standing in. My wife is standing in for who is it? You're the guy with the big mouth, right? No, Sai was the other one. Sai was Andrea. You were the other one. Yuzum. You were Yuzum, yeah. So she was Yuzum, and Andrea in the black tank top is Sai Snoodles. And then they got a taiko drummer there. He was really playing that. And then the girls were actually 3 dancers from the San Francisco Ballet. And then this was when we were actually shooting. It was a very, very hot day. The funny thing about the 3 girls, the Mercedes is the one in the background. This is on the right side here. Mercedes in the back. I can't remember the lady in the front, and I can't remember the other 2 names. But the lady in the very front, she wore basically it was just a bunch of leather straps is all she wore, and she was painted blue, and because she was in such a scantily clad outfit, whenever she sat down, she left 2 little blue butt prints wherever she sat down. So that was amusing for the crew. But yeah, they were actually a real great. Well, my computer's hung
Did
up.
you and Anna meet at ILM?
No, we met in Australia, so not for something completely different. So. But she eventually worked there, and she did. Whoops! I crashed my computer. Just didn't want to show you guys that. Now I got to find it again.
This break is brought to you by Apple.
Yeah, really. Thanks a lot, Apple. Yeah, she did wardrobe a lot. She's actually she should be up here talking too. She was actually Anakin's hand in the pod race for a scene. I guess they were looking around one day and they needed some little boy's hand, and she fit the bill. Sorry, I'll get to that. There we go. So let's see. Back to those photos.
I think we all just want to go through your computer now. This is
So yeah, so there we go. Back to that one, and then halfway through the day, there's the girl with the blue butt. Halfway through the day, George and Rick came up with this idea to have Boba Fett talking to the girls, and so they had me go get a costume at the archives, and I wore Boba Fett, and I think I'll be on my gravestone that I did that. I played it for all of 10 seconds, and I've known more for Boba Fett than anything else.
well, yeah. We actually had somebody come up early and say, can you sign it as Boba Fett? So, do you regret not having gone into some other realm of this, or it just you've touched in so many areas. You've done the archives and you've done the acting side, and do you feel like the model making was the key thing for you?
No, I always wanted to be more of a filmmaker, and the model making and all the effects stuff was just something that I happened to be able to make a living at least for a while. Yeah, I would have liked to have gone into higher up in the film chain, I guess. The model making, I was not. A lot of people, a lot of model makers that I work with, that's what they love to do. I built models when I was a kid, but it was not a passion of mine. Like I said, the makeup and sculptural stuff was much more of a passion. So.
What's the movie that you've worked on that you wish more people knew your work in? You're so known for Star Wars, and obviously credentials for many more. Is there something you're really proud of that you wish more people had seen?
Well, actually, they did. Pirates of the Caribbean, I was really loved the work that we did on that. That was one of the ones I had the most fun. I had a lot of fun on the Star Wars films, by all means. But yeah, Pirates was a lot of fun because I had just come off of the Matrix movie sequels, and we were building yet more of the same. It was like futuristic sci-fi stuff with lots of mud on it. That's what it felt like. And we were building pipes and things breaking, and it was kind of boring. And I got to work on Pirates, and I got to learn how to build boats, pirate ships. So, and I think in the course of 3 years, I built something like 10 or 12 ships. I was involved in 10 or 12 ships in that course. Because not only for the Pirates films, there was. We did a ship for Peter Pan. We ended up doing it twice because they didn't like the shape of the hull. We did a ferry for War of the Worlds. So we did all this stuff. So yeah. So that led to that one I'm the most proudest of. Probably the work that we did there.
That reminds. Oh, I want to remind everybody we've got just a few minutes left. So any last-minute questions, write them down, hold them up, and we'll get them in the next few minutes because we're going to be done shortly. But when you talk about a boat getting that far into the process and then they decide they don't like the hull.
Welcome to Hollywood.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'm wondering about the chain of command there. Why did they not see that before this boat is sitting in front of them?
There's an interesting phenomenon that happens with visual people in filmmaking that can't visualize. We had artwork that was created. Matter of fact, you see that hull. And you can see how extreme it was in the background of one of these pictures. So that ship, that one way in the back, it's upside down, but it's almost shaped like an hourglass or almost like the top of a temple. And you could see then the more subtle curves of this ship, and that was supposed to be Captain Hook's ship, and it was certainly meant to be much more fantastic than the grounded in reality ships that we did for Pirates of the Caribbean, for instance. And so this was actually what was bought off on by the artwork. But when they actually saw it in a physical sense, they go, wait a minute, that looks kind of weird. And we all like, yeah, it does, but that's what you bought, that's what you paid for. And they go, well, I don't think we like that. And so we ended up having to rebuild it.
So how much time were we talking about here that got pitched?
We were 2 weeks away from finishing it. It was actually about to be sent in. It was farther along than that model that you see up front. And we had the deck done, and we were about to send it to the paint department. And they go, stop. And so we looked at ways of seeing if we could split it down the keel and like bring the sides. It's like, it'd be much easier if we just rebuilt the thing. So, and that's what we did. We were able to salvage pieces like the deck pieces and stuff. But yeah, I think we lost 2 months. 2 months on that.
What was it like for the insiders, yourself, the people who'd been there for so long, when the Disney deal went through? I mean, that's the end of an era. I know a lot of us as audiences were wondering what was going to happen, how it would show up on the screen, but what did that feel like for you to know that that era had ended?
Yeah, well, I wasn't there actually. The era ended for us in 2006 when they sold the model shop to a company called Kerner Optical, and we continued for a few years doing the work that way. But we definitely saw the sadness of it. For us, there was a very much of a sadness when then Kerner Optical, I think in 2011, went out of business, filed bankruptcy. And so what was the facility of ILM at the time? By that point, all of ILM had moved to the Presidio and was there, so all the digital effects were there. And they had left behind in 2004, 2005, they had left behind the practical side, so the stage department and that. So 2006, when Kerner Optical purchased the model shop, they took over all those pieces, all the model shop and the stage department. And then they went out of business and they had to auction all that stuff off. So that was really sad. A lot of people actually couldn't even go there to see the place empty, where we had once done all this amazing work. I remember in the late 60s, I guess they did a similar thing at MGM Studios, and they sold off all the property, and they sold all, they were having auctions of, Wizard of Oz stuff that had been sitting there, and people felt the same sadness, and it definitely was a very downer of a day being there. So.
Well, let's talk about something more uplifting than that. Tell us about White Room Artifacts, which is something you're working on now.
Yeah, the White Room Artifacts is the company actually that my wife and I started. We actually started it I'm trying to get to some photos real quick. Here's some fun stuff. Here's R2 on a horse. I'll get to White Room Artifacts in a minute. I'll show you some funny stuff. This was actually, we came up with an idea back in, during episode 1 about doing a little film with R2, and then we actually didn't realize it until episode 2, and it ended up evolving into what's known as R2-D2 Beneath the Dome, and it's supposed to be the expose on R2's life. And that's actually at Skywalker Ranch, and the reason R2 went into acting is because he had a hard time with his father, who was a mounted policeman in England, and so because he couldn't get on a horse. So this was how the film was actually going to originally end, and you're going to see R2 on a horse, but we never got that way. That's my son with Darth Maul. He's sitting over there now. He's 16 years old now, so Obi-Wan and the fake Obi-Wan. That was for a dummy that the creature department made for episode 3 when Anakin's supposed to be carrying an unconscious Obi-Wan all the way around. And it was so funny with when Ewan saw it, he says, "Hey, it looks like me when I'm drunk laying around." And now this is the weirdest thing. That these are the little babies that they made. That's supposed to be Luke and Leia. And having had children and holding a real baby, this was the creepiest thing because they're like these cold, rubbery little, and they're weighted right, and it just was really it's disgusting. So he's rescuing. So anyway. Oh, and this was, I don't know if you could read this very well. There was a great makeup artist that I work with, Stefan Dupuis. He got an Academy Award for The Fly, and he's done a lot of stuff. He did Mrs. Doubtfire. He worked on Mrs. Doubtfire, but he's a great caricaturist. And this was his take on. He worked with us on episode 3, and this was his take on what we do at the model shop. So that's me in the forklift down to the bottom here. So. And then this was a Simpson-style cartoon that somebody did. I'm fourth from the right there, and Lauren Peterson. You can see Lauren Peterson, kind of dead center there. Steve Gawley's the tall guy there.
Who's the belly scratcher? Who got that honor?
This guy named John Foreman. It nailed all of our personalities perfectly. Now, the interesting thing, you see no women. Your next talk is the women of the model shop, and ask them about this because some of the women there were a lot of women that worked in the model shop and very, very talented people. But the artist that did this was so afraid of offending women by making a caricature of them, and they were offended because they weren't included in the. Right Room Artifacts, this is actually Lauren working on a model. We created it in 2000, it was 2010. It was after we left Kerner Optical to create museum exhibitions initially. And so our first exhibition is touring through Europe right now. It's called NASA Human Adventure. And we conceived and designed and created, and because I was designing it, I said, hey, you know what this needs is some really cool models in it. So we built a Saturn V replica, full 10th scale, that was the full thing, the whole ship. And I think it's a picture of it in the exhibit. It is. Getting to work with, I called up people like Steve Gawley and Lauren Peters. I had the original model shop, Star Wars model shop, working with us, and they had a blast because a lot of those guys, by the time I came along at ILM, they were already supervising, so they didn't get as much hands-on. And they were always stressing about budgets and scheduling and that sort of thing. So we never got to see them actually build. And darn, those guys are good model makers. And just to let them go crazy with the models and stuff. But one of the things we did do, there's the space shuttle we did, all the tiles, and that's a 24th scale. So the space shuttle's about 5 feet long or so. We actually numbered all the tiles. Yeah, so it was a lot of fun. So we got to say which models we wanted to build, and Steve and a few of us were all big space program fans. So it was a great experience.
And this is currently touring.
It's outside of Amsterdam, in Utrecht, in Europe. It started out in Stockholm, went to Madrid, Istanbul, Utrecht, and then it goes to Tokyo next. Then we also did, I've got a video actually I could show you. This is for a series of commercials for Comcast when they introduced Skype. And we made these little rooms that these people wore on their heads. So they looked like they were in a TV. And so that was the joke behind it. So remember this one, and I'll show you a video of it. That's actually a frame of the video. Let me see if I can pull up the video now, if I don't crash the computer again. No, it's not that one. Date night. Oh, I did open it in that. Sorry. Darn Max. Yep.
I was going to say the exact same thing. That's weird.
We should do this every night.
Dude. Day night.
Skyline Xfinity. It's like you're there. Now make video calls right from your TV.
So we did that. And there's another one we did. We did a thing for Google Play. Darn computers. This was when they introduced Google Play, well, I'll tell you the story after you see it. So.
Google Play uses the power of the web, so you can buy a song on your laptop. It's instantly available on your phone. Put a book down on your phone. simply here.
So I've got a picture. Oh, there it is. View full screen. So that's obviously from the commercial, but that's what it was. That's the team that did it. The director all the way to the left, and the art director all the way to the right, and then our team at White Room that did the effects on it. From conception to airing, it was 21 days. So we had to build that in that time, shoot it, and then they did all the post-production. It's actually 2 takes combined together, and there's actually a second case that he actually closes. It's not the same case that he closes, but notably on this crew, right behind me is John Berg, who I was talking about earlier, did the walkers, and then right in the center is a guy named Gary Platic, and Gary actually furthered the technology for the cloud tanks, that technology, you know, like in Raiders of the Lost Ark, the clouds that form over the islands, that's actually done in water with tempera paint. And that's one of the things that Gary did. So it's great that our company, we have the resource of these incredibly talented and experienced people that, you know, that have, you know, still a lot of great ideas in them. So.
Let me slip in a couple audience questions here. Do you think that some modern films' storylines and the artistry of the films might be suffering as digital effects take over, become more the norm?
Yeah, well, I think there's a whole revolution, you know, with digital shooting. It's not just digital effects, it's the fact that with a digital camera, in the old days, every time, you know, that you turn that camera on, that was money going through the camera, you know, so everything was precious, you know, the takes were precious, you didn't want to screw up, you know, so even though they were big budgets, you know, the film itself was expensive, and so you would plan out a little bit better, you know, actors would know their lines a little bit better, all sorts of things like that. Now with digital, you can just shoot and shoot and shoot and shoot, and kind of make it up as, you know, later. Not that everyone does that, but I think it's really revolutionized, and until it all settles, I think it has probably damaged in some way, you know, the way they approach and make a film. I think on the other hand, though, you know, it's now anybody with a computer like this and a camera, and a cheap camera, can make a movie too. So it's like open the door a little bit more, but that also means there's more junk out there too.
Someone would like to know about getting into the film industry these days. Where would you recommend someone who wants to get into professional makeup start specifically? That's,
you know, I think there's a few places down in LA that have classes that teach still. I know Joe Blasco, who's a renowned makeup artist, he still teaches. Dick Smith, who was, he's in his 90s, he's still around, and he did The Exorcist, and Amadeus, he did F. Murray Abraham's age makeup for Amadeus. I believe he still has a makeup, a course that you can take. It's like a correspondence course. And so you know, those are the best way to learn, I guess. The other thing is then just create a portfolio of work and knock on the doors of the effects houses that are down there. And if you've got able to work in Europe, that's where all the work seems to be going right now. So.
We're going to fish back. You told me when we first talked a couple weeks ago that you enjoy storytelling, and you're right. This is good to just let you tell your stories. And someone wants to hear any funny Kenny Baker or Anthony Daniels stories you'd like to pass along.
I can't tell those in public. I told you that. I know who probably asked that question too. No, well, Kenny and Anthony have a very nice, respectful relationship with each other. So yeah, no, I can't say those stories in public. Sorry.
Well, with that refusal, I think we're going to wrap up then. I really thank you for the show and tell and for everything. This has just been marvelous, and thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you for all coming today.